Greetings, everyone. I am Susan Hoffman, the director of the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute here at UC Berkeley. This afternoon, we have our esteemed colleague, Amy Eva, with a PhD in psychology, who is also the Associate Education Director of the Greater Good Science Center that is here at UC Berkeley. As you will see, her presentation, which is entitled Caring for Ourselves, the Science of Emotional Resilience, is a presentation that's based on her research and strategies that she's developed on self-compassion, and particularly in difficult times. And if now does not qualify as a difficult time, hardly anything could be argued. Understanding and naming our emotions is also part of what the presentation will delve into, and learning how to challenge default thoughts and beliefs. As an educational psychologist and teacher educator, Dr. Eva writes, presents, and leads online courses about adult well-being and resilience. Please welcome Dr. Amy Eva, and here is Amy.
Hello, everyone. I wish I could see your faces. I was just talking to the team here about how hard it is to sit in my little office. I'm actually in Seattle, looking out at a sunny Seattle, by the way, and staring at a camera. And I have behind the camera a bunch of smiling faces to help me look at you. And I'm imagining your faces and you sitting in your spaces, and hopefully you're comfortable and have maybe a nice drink in hand. And looking forward to talking with all of you about this incredibly important topic. So what I'd like to do to begin is just for all of us to take a moment with our breath. And I am going to ask you, this is a favorite quote of mine, sometimes the most important thing in the whole day is the rest you take between two deep breaths. And so as you kind of enter into this Zoom space, as we enter into this space together, I'm going to invite everyone on your own to just take 3 really intentional breaths where you try to slow down and breathe deeply from your diaphragm. And one more tip, as you're breathing in, try to extend your out breath a little longer than your in breath. And so I'm gonna invite you to do that right now. I'm not gonna count, I'm just gonna ask you to do that quietly wherever you are, and I'll come back to you in a few minutes. So 3 deep, intentional, slow breaths. So some of you may very well be mindfulness practitioners, and you may engage in practices where you're aware of your breath. This is a little bit different than that. Paced breathing, where you intentionally pattern your breathing, for example, 4 seconds in, 8 seconds out, any sort of pattern that you follow with paced breathing can automatically, no matter what's going on up here in your head, can start to regulate your physiology, your nervous system, your heart rate, your digestion, your blood pressure. And so just with some conscious deep breathing, and if you try to extend your out breath a little bit longer than your in breath, hopefully you're still with me and not too relaxed, because the in breath represents the sympathetic nervous system. So that part of us that gets us ready to fight or flight, that alerts us. So if you think about when you are startled, I just took this big intake of breath in that startle to alert me to move or to freeze. And so the sympathetic nervous system is engaged with your in breath. But if you practice extending your out breath for longer periods of time, that sparks your parasympathetic nervous system. So that's the rest and digest system, the relax, or the system that will help you to slow down. So that's your first quick tip for the morning, if you weren't already aware, or for the afternoon, I should say. So let's get started. What we're going to do today is we're going to talk, as Susan shared, we're going to talk about tools we can draw on to support our emotional resilience. And I have 3 primary tools I would like to share with you that are research-based, evidence-based. And then at the end, I'm going to share with you some general tips about daily well-being and activities that are proving to be helpful and energizing during the pandemic, as well as some daily questions to ask yourself while you are we are all still grappling with COVID. Can you believe it? So, and I want to just give credit where credit is due. Susan was saying that this is my research. And what I do now is I used to be a professor, a tenured professor, and I joined Greater Good Science Center. And now I don't do original research, but I translate research. So I look at all the best research on well-being and resilience. And so does my team at Greater Good. And we try to translate it in a really user-friendly fashion through our magazine, through our Science of Happiness podcast, through a whole list of research-based practices on a website. I'll share with you at the end how to get access to those for free. So we're the translators of the research at Greater Good. And what I wanted to do to kick things off with you, I was talking to Susan and Nancy and other members of the team, and we were talking about how important it feels at this time, like a year and a half in to this pandemic. It's probably really important for us to kind of name together what are some of the challenges that we have faced. And so I just wanted to open it up and ask you, you might see if you tap on chat on your screen, there's a chat box and you can type in, if you would, and I can't read everyone's challenges, but I love to see what some of you would say when I ask you the question, what are some of the key challenges you faced over the last year and a half? Okay, they're coming already. Okay. Loneliness hit me first. Death of loved ones. Boredom, yeah. Feeling emotionally stable, feeling confused. Anxiety. Missing out on your people, on your family. Isolation's popping up several times. Existential despair. Someone, Joan says, I miss hugs. Doom scrolling, we're going to talk about that. Fear of going out, that cave syndrome. Feeling abandoned by the healthcare system. Feeling short-tempered. I can't even read, they're coming so quickly. I don't know if you all can see them too, or if it's just me, but they're coming so quickly. Someone's writing, not knowing how long this is going to last. Yes, that loss of control, that helplessness, loss of purpose, meaning, and focus. Wow. Yes. Grieving alone. And then the fires on top of it, yes. Okay. I'm gonna let you keep streaming those out because it helps to say them, even if I don't read them aloud. And while you're still writing, I'm going to share with you a couple of clinical psychologists in the area, in the Bay Area, who I've talked to. And I said, hey, I have this data, I asked these colleagues of mine, I have this data about mental health, but can you tell me what you're seeing in your offices? So I just want to reflect back to you what they are seeing and see if you relate. They're saying the most impacted were the people quarantined by themselves during the first round of the quarantine. And that loneliness word is popping up for me in my head, which I saw first on this list. They're saying a sense of impatience about the politics of health, a worry that they will be left to suffer, an anger about the worry of money and an inability to care for themselves. My colleague was saying she has never heard more people talk about mortality and about death as she is now. She has also heard, which is interesting, and I think Susan and Nancy and I were talking about this, some of her clients have been focused on, oh, that's later, passage of time, that there's this, at this age, in this period of life, there's a concern about passage of time and how little time we have left. And the passage of time during COVID has been much harder. It's kind of thrown that concern into sharp relief. And the challenges keep streaming. So we can hold with that there are so many challenges that we haven't been with our people, and there's a lot. I also want to, in this moment, ask you this, because I know I've experienced this. I hope you have too. With all of this time, this isolation, this pandemic, are there any particular insights that you've experienced? Have you experienced greater clarity around your values, around what's important to you? And would folks be willing to share that briefly as we get started? We need each other. Being an introvert can be an advantage. Cave syndrome. Yes, cherishing the moment. It's okay to do nothing. Someone just said more important to be connected with your neighbors. I've found that I'm suddenly so much more invested in my neighbors. Wondering who your real friends are and maybe clarifying that. Learning, whoops, I missed that one. Giving yourself grace. We are going to talk about that as one strategy. Clarity about the interrelatedness of our biggest problems. Boy, we have a lot of opportunity with all that's becoming clear in our world right now. As an educator, I'm daunted and very excited about that, all the opportunity that we have right now. Creativity can inspire motivation. People are appreciating their solitude and they're cherishing time with friends and family. Love of my dog. I have 3 cats. They're usually behind me, but not right now. I thought that would be too much. Love the pets, love that sensation of petting the pets. Bird song, cats. I will share with you too that one of the psychologists I spoke to said that some of the people in her office have really gotten clarity around wanting to improve things in the coming years. Not like necessarily clarifying a list of a bucket list, but just really wanting to live intentionally with more meaning in one's life. The sense of meaning has been really important to some of her clients, and finding meaning, finding connection. And the last thing I'll say is someone wrote endless time to read. I'm a big fan as well of the reading. Okay, that was a lot. And we've named the many challenges and some of the insights. And I'm just going to follow that up with some data so you kind of know where we are right now. I did a brief review of the literature on COVID, and it's coming, right? It's coming quickly, and it's not completely up to date what I'm sharing with you, but the data that I'm sharing with you is primarily up through April 2021. And so it's mainly 2020 and through the spring of this year. And so I'm sure you won't be startled to hear some of this, but the Gallup Global Emotions Report for 2021, they surveyed 160,000 people in 116 countries, their positive daily experiences and their negative daily experiences. And these negative emotions are at a high across the globe, and stress, anxiety, and depression are at an all-time high. Stress, I should be more specific. Stress is at an all-time high. Anxiety and depression are high. One of the things that really surprised me in this literature, and it is what it is, there are probably a dozen studies that are summarized here. Last year, life satisfaction, loneliness, and suicide rates were actually fairly stable. Most surprised by the loneliness. I thought that would have skyrocketed. And I do think the suicide rates for teens have gone up. I think this is looking more at adults. And then, of course, as we look at all of the issues, or the cluster of issues we've been facing across the globe, many pre-existing inequalities in psychological distress remain. So people from traditionally marginalized racial groups are suffering more, people who live in urban settings, people who have lower income, people who are unemployed or inactive or even retired, people living without a partner, those with pre-existing health condition, and those who are experiencing being near someone with COVID and grieving around that. But the newer profiles of risk are these, which I don't know if you'll be surprised or not, but females are suffering more than males. And when you think about all the females who are parents, that makes a lot of sense to me, and all that is on their plates. And then parents in general of children under 5. And then finally, young adults, many of whom are living on their own. So enough now of naming it. Well, we're going to talk about a strategy related to naming it, but we are at least situating the problem, which we're all very well aware of. Someone just asked, and I glanced down, would you kindly repeat the specific poll or study reference? I won't catch these all the time, so we're going to have questions at the end. There are, at the bottom of the screen, several references, and I'm happy to send those to you if anyone wants to, but the specific Gallup Global Emotions Report, if you Google Gallup Global Emotions Report 2021, you will find exactly the report that I was talking about relative to mental health. So let's go to strategies, everybody. So these are the 3 we're going to talk about: labeling and describing our emotions, learning how to be self-compassionate. Someone talked about giving themselves grace. It's connected. Challenging your thoughts and beliefs. I'm going to share a practice with you that you can use after this to really dig into challenging some of those not so helpful thoughts and beliefs that creep up on us. And first, we're talking about labeling emotions. So emotional granularity is this ability that you can build over time to distinguish between a range of different emotions and label them with some nuance. So why would this be a tremendously helpful strategy? Maybe you didn't feel a heck of a lot better when you saw or heard all of the challenges that we're facing. However, in the moment, if you are able individually to articulate with some skill and nuance exactly what you're feeling, number one, that can lower the intensity of the feeling. You've probably heard of name it to tame it. There's something to that in terms of the research. When we name a difficult emotion, we can literally move from the amygdala, the emotion center of our brain, to the CEO of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, and get a little bit of distance from it. So the intensity is lessened. And also, if we have a clear sense of what we are feeling, emotions have a function, and they can cue us to a next best action. Now, sometimes not the best action, but they can be helpful cues. So in other words, if you witness someone being harassed at the grocery store or in your neighborhood, and you are near that event, and you feel a general sense of anger or badness or discomfort, that's one thing. But if you are able to articulate for yourself a clear sense of like righteous indignation, I feel angry, I feel righteous and indignation, it's a little bit more specific, then maybe that clarity could cue you to be responsive in the moment, to call for help, to intervene in a way that feels right, to just interrupt that harassment, to ask someone the time, to, a benign question, just to kind of interrupt what's going on. So clarity around our emotions can lose their intensity when we have clarity around them, and they can cue us to further action that could be productive. So for example, here is a classic, this particular mood meter is used in schools across the country. It was designed by Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. You may have heard of Mark Brackett's book, Permission to Feel. This is a curriculum around emotional intelligence and building emotional intelligence in kids. And so it's just a really simple application of this concept that I just shared with you. So for example, right now, if you could place yourself right in this moment or this morning when you woke up, just choose a time. How are you feeling right now? So if you look at the chart, you look at the vertical, how much energy are you feeling right now? So if you were higher energy, you'd be up in the red or the yellow, okay? And then how pleasant or unpleasant are you feeling in this moment? As you can see, the pleasantness is the horizontal. So higher pleasantness would be yellow or green, okay? So in other words, let me just give an example. I right now am pretty high energy because I am talking to you and I get excited about this topic and connecting with people around well-being. So I'm pretty high energy, and I'm also feeling positive. This is a difficult conversation, but I always feel hopeful when I'm in these conversations. So where would that put me? It would put me, I think I'm right. And here's just the same diagram with more words to describe each of the sections. So I would place myself probably in the yellow zone because I'm high energy and pleasant. So I'd say I'm pleasant, I'm focused, I'm energized, and I'm hopeful. So all words in the yellow. These are the kinds of things we're doing with kids right now in schools, helping them with emotional regulation and helping them to get a clear sense of what they're feeling in a given moment. And my goodness, we do it in staff trainings for teachers, and we can do it with ourselves just to kind of get a sense of where we are at a given time. Why are we doing this? There's a lot of research to back it up. I want to share with you that people who are able to articulate their emotions pretty clearly are better at regulating them. They're better at calming themselves and navigating difficult times. They have improved physical health, and that's measured, for example, by fewer doctor's office visits, less alcohol in their lives, less aggressive behavior and self-injury, and less depression as a result of ongoing stress. And teens, we're seeing in particular, struggle with identifying the types of negative emotions they're feeling. But when they do, they have a lower level of negative affect or negative emotion. Okay, so that's strategy one. Just simply naming where you are. There is a huge body of research that's in development in last 15 years or so, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with self-compassion research, but Kristen Neff and Chris Germer and a number of other researchers. Kristen Neff is at the University of Texas at Austin. She has kind of been the forerunner of this work. And so self-compassion, she has a book I'll share with you in a second, is essentially what's shared in this quote, but really what it is, to put it in user-friendly terms, is learning how to make friends or be friends with yourself, which for many of us is really difficult. We can do it with each other, we can do it with our loved ones, we can be a dear friend to them, but when it comes to cutting ourselves some slack and providing grace for ourselves, many of us struggle. So just a little bit about how self-compassion, why self-compassion is important. When you think about your threat system in your body, back in the day, we were able to naturally respond to threat. The tiger in the bushes who came out and chased us would ignite our threat defense system. We would know to fight or flee, hopefully flee, in this case, if it's a tiger, and find a way to protect ourselves when there was a physical threat. But when we are self-critical, when we're really hard on ourselves, we also experience a palpable threat. It's just a psychological threat rather than a physical threat. And our bodies don't necessarily know the difference. So a stress response can be triggered when you say things to yourself that are not very kind, when you constantly criticize yourself, worry, ruminate, all these things. And we end up becoming both the attacker and the attacked in this context, which is really particularly challenging. So there are a number of scholars who've been studying compassion and studying self-compassion. Paul Gilbert is one of them. And he talks about this threat system and how we, when we are being tough on ourselves, need to tap into oxytocin and our mammalian caregiving system. We need to find ways to self-soothe. And for some of us, that can feel uncomfortable. But what I'm really talking about here, and what Kristen Neff is suggesting and Paul Gilbert is suggesting, is that we speak to ourselves with warmth, that we are gentle with ourselves, literally, in terms of maybe the way we speak in our minds, and that even something like soothing touch, like even just grabbing your own shoulder or giving yourself a hug, that may make you feel uncomfortable, but there's evidence to show that that is really, can be really powerful. I know that when I was in a pretty toxic work environment a few years back, I would literally like sometimes grab my arms. You can't see what I'm doing, but grab my arms and give myself a hug during some of those tough moments. And no one knew what I was doing. I looked like my arms were crossed, but these little moments when we can kind of cut ourselves some slack and care for ourselves can actually have an effect. So if you're interested in learning more about self-compassion practices, I can share some with you at the end, but for now, I want to talk to you about the major components of self-compassion and how in a given moment, when you are having a difficult time, you can reassure yourself. So here are the three components, and you might want to even share these with your family or your teen. My daughter is 17 and I share this with her, and I even have some hand gestures to go with it to kind of, she's probably not loving those at 17, but when she was 12, she appreciated the hand gestures to go with. So I'll share those with you to help you remember these three. So the first element of self-compassion is this sense of mindfulness, of just holding with whatever situation you're facing. You're grieving around the loss of a loved one, for example, and you're acknowledging for yourself, this is really tough this really hurts, and you're simply kind of holding with it. So you're not over connected to it, you're not detached from it, but you're kind of holding with it, you're accepting it, and you're naming it. It's kind of that naming piece that we already talked about. The second component is common humanity versus isolation. Yes, I'm grieving. Yes, this is a difficult time, and I'm not alone. I mean, there are a lot of people around me who are also grieving as well. I can reach out to them. I'm not alone. I'm seeing a flash that my internet is unstable, so I'm just going to name that and hope that we're good. And then the last one is self-kindness versus self-judgment. So that is the sense of just extending yourself some kindness, calm words, reassurance. What would you say to someone else who is grieving? Gosh, I am so sorry that you're going through this. How can I support you? What kind of support do you need if you're grieving, and how can you give it to yourself? So just as I'm a teacher, I have to show you the hand gestures so you can remember. So I'm going to back up. So mindfulness, if you're feeling really self-critical, you can symbolize it by arms outstretched, tight fists. If you feel tense, it doesn't feel good, you're not cutting yourself any slack. But if you open up your hands and you just kind of hold with this moment, gently, and you acknowledge what you're struggling with, that is the mindfulness piece. Common humanity is like stretching your arms out. I am not alone. There are other people dealing with this too. And then self-kindness is, hey, I can cut myself some slack. I can be kind to myself. I can give myself what I need right now. This is tough. So those are the three components. And benefits. If you're bucking against this a little bit and thinking, you know, my self-criticism has gotten me places, and that's the way I thrive, is when I'm tough on myself. Think about how well a child would respond if a child comes home and tells you, I got an F on the math test, Dad, and Dad says something really mean to the child. It's not going to be particularly motivating for the child in the future. But if the dad says to the child, hey, I'm really sorry that that you didn't get the grade that you wanted, what can we do next time to figure out how to study differently? That's going to be more motivating. It's going to be more beneficial for the child's health, etc. So benefits of self-compassion: reduction in negative mind states. For example, I'm looking for my notes. Perfectionism, shame, body dissatisfaction, disordered eating, depression and stress. A lot of research on this. Increase in positive mind states like life satisfaction, happiness, self-confidence, well-being. Decrease in fatigue and burnout. When we're working really hard to be there for our families and at our workplaces, and we cut ourselves some slack and we're kind and gentle with ourselves, we are less likely to burn out and have fatigue. We're also more motivated because we're not riding ourselves in the same way, and we're cutting ourselves the slack, and we have healthier behaviors. So the last strategy I want to share with you, which seemed to be of interest, I know Nancy was talking with me about it earlier, and I think Susan too. Some of you have probably heard of cognitive behavioral therapy, but let me tell you, the research around CBT, around cognitive behavioral therapy, is strong in terms of how it can combat anxiety and depression specifically. So here's sort of just a little social cognitive theory 101. This is the cognitive triangle, and the idea behind it It's a well-known framework by cognitive behavioral theorist and psychologist Aaron Beck back in the day. And the idea behind it is that something happens. For example, I read a headline in the morning before I go on my walk. This is me yesterday. I tell myself something. This is never going to end. It's getting worse. That's kind of what I said to myself yesterday. I feel something for me yesterday morning when I started doom scrolling, as someone said. I was feeling anxiety, I was feeling grief, I was feeling anger, I was feeling helplessness. And then I do something. So what happened yesterday morning when I decided to start my morning with the news before I went on my walk with my husband was I ended up not enjoying my walk very much, because we ended up in this sort of cycle of ruminating about the news and about politics and about health. And this morning I did it very differently. And I read something really uplifting before I left on our walk. And my feelings, what I was telling myself, everything, that flow of reciprocity between thoughts, actions, and feelings, actually, there was quite a shift for me this morning. I appreciated, I live actually in Seattle by Alki Beach, and I get to walk by the beach every day. My house isn't on the beach, but I get to walk by the beach. And I really, really savored it and enjoyed the moment this morning because I did something different. And it set me up for a much better morning. So I wanted to share with you too, apart from making different choices about what we do, we can also reflect back on an event and we can shift or change our interpretation of that situation or event. So how do we interrupt the triangle of something happens, thoughts, feelings? We go back and we re-look at what just happened, whether it's in the moment or later that evening, and we try to shift our thinking and reframe it so we get a different ripple effect from that triangle. So for example, maybe someone in your family or a friend yells at you or raises their voice, and you think to yourself, this is absolutely awful. It feels terrible to be yelled at or called out. And you think, like, what did I do to deserve this from this person who I care about? And if you're able to pause and reassess, you can begin to adjust your thinking. You can perhaps say to yourself, okay, this was not a fun moment. And this person who yelled at me, maybe they're having a really tough time and it's not about me. So that could lessen the intensity of your feelings and you might be able to engage in a more productive way with that person. Just a quick example. So cognitive reappraisal, if you practice it in a really structured way, can lessen anxiety and it can lessen depression. And I have a full practice that is actually at the bottom of this slide that takes you through a number of questions to help you evaluate a particularly stressful event and your reaction to it. So I can't give it to you now in the moment because we have a large group of people, but I want to encourage you to check it out. And I'll show you the website where you can find this at the very end of our time together. But I will share with you that some of the go-to questions that I ask myself in the moment when I overreact, I tend to personalize things. Like, this is my fault that this bad thing happened. And I also tend to catastrophize things, which you might have detected when I talked about reading the news yesterday. So checking the facts and asking yourself, what makes me think that this thought or reaction that I'm having is true? Like, what is really going on in this situation? Is there another way to look at this? Those kinds of questions are really important to kind of move you out of that reactionary space. So I wanted to also, as we get toward the end here and get to questions in about 5 minutes, I wanted to also talk to you. So we've talked about naming and describing emotions. We've talked about self-compassion and kind of being with yourself in the moment and cutting yourself some slack. We've talked about cognitive reappraisal and learning how to challenge and question your thoughts. And you will have access to a practice you can do around that. But I also wanted to share with you, like, the importance of asking yourself big picture, like, how am I spending my time and my days right now? There are limitations and constraints around how we spend our time, but we can also have some real agency and intentionality about that right now as well. So I looked at the latest research, which kind of reflects general research about healthy activities around resilience. But I'm wondering if anyone, I got rid of my chat box here, I'll bring it back. I'm wondering if anyone can guess what the most negative, the activity that affects anxiety and depression, let me just check notes, and reduces life satisfaction. Does anyone want to guess what the #1 activity in the research is around COVID that does that? Julia, you're right. Oh, you got it. It's so kind of obvious, isn't it? Right at the news, people are like all over it. Lack of exercise, that's the counter. Yep. Okay, so, and these during the pandemic, but they're good anytime. These were some of the activities in 2020. Y'all are cracking me up. That were listed as the most beneficial to life satisfaction and to a reduction in depression and anxiety. Someone wrote too much wine, which made me crack up. So exercise, gardening, time in nature, reading, listening to music, and volunteering. All right, and finally, I want to share with you, as we close, a list of 6 daily quarantine questions. These were offered by Brooke Anderson in one of our Greater Good magazine articles that went viral. And these are the 6 questions. So again, this was featured in an article on our free online magazine. All of these are actually ironically research-based. I don't think that was her intention initially when she posted them, but they went viral last year. And I have these questions on my refrigerator for our family. And I have to tell you on a personal note, these questions have guided me throughout the last 1.5 years. So things to do every day. Ask yourself what I am grateful for today. Tons of gratitude research. I could do a whole workshop on that. Who am I checking in on or connecting with today? What expectations of normal am I letting go of today? How am I getting outside today? How am I moving my body? So it's not just moving your body, but getting outside. Notice that. What beauty am I love this one. What beauty am I either creating, cultivating, or inviting in today? And that made me think of one of you who said bird song. I sit in my hammock on the back deck. It's one of my favorite COVID activities. And I listen to the birds, and it is beauty. I want to say to you to close that the 2 that rise to the top right now for me are #3, what expectations of normal am I letting go of today? If you're a self-critical person, and I have struggled with that in my life, this is a really important one. Octavia Butler, the novelist, says the only lasting truth is change. And I think that every time I'm able to just let go of an expectation, I'm better off. And then the other one is, who am I checking in on or connecting with today? Regardless of what a Gallup report says about loneliness or other research, this piece that is so crucial to all of us is social support. We're wired to want to be seen and to belong and to be with each other. And we are most resilient when we support each other and when we're in relationship. So I want to talk with you for the last few minutes. Here's some questions. And it looks like, Fran, you wrote, Amy hasn't mentioned a spiritual practice. I often do whole classes and lectures on mindfulness, which is one of my spiritual practices. And I think I agree with you, Fran. I think that a religious or spiritual practice could be on this list and would be well received by all of us. So I want to open it up. I'll defer to Susan and Nancy here too, but I want to thank you so much for spending the time thinking about this with me. And I want to share with you free resources. If you don't know about the Greater Good Science Center, I am so lucky to be working for them over the last 4.5 years. And this is our website and our online magazine, totally free articles. Sign up for our newsletter. And these are our two websites where we literally take original research and we translate interventions, research-based, randomized controlled trials, and so forth, into practices for well-being and for living a meaningful life. And GGIA is Greater Good in Action for adults, and GGIE is Greater Good in Education. So if you are from a family of teachers or you have children in your lives, we have over 200 free practices for kids and teachers and school staff here. If you have questions, you can email me beyond right now. And I did the graphics. Someone just said, who did the graphics? I'm learning. That's another thing I'm learning as an online teacher now is graphics, but it was Canva. It was Canva that helped with my graphics. All right. So I guess I'm going to start looking for questions, and I haven't been reading the chat box at all because I'm not good at multitasking, or at least I haven't been reading it much. So I'm happy to look at questions. Okay,
you should take a breath, and we
I would love that.
Applaud you.
Okay.
Really, thank you very much for such a wonderful and right presentation for the moment. I think we will all breathe a little easier. There is general appreciation for the slides, and they really liked the graph that was on the XY axis.
Yeah.
So I want to say, with your permission, Amy, we would like to send it to everybody who registered for today's talk. And
the slides, Susan?
Yes. Is that okay?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I've already sent them to Rob. So.
Okay. Yep. Well, so we will share it with everybody who registered for today. And also it will be, we'll send it out through an email after we've been able to caption today's talk and post it on YouTube. So all of our members who are receiving the benefit of hearing you today can share it with family and friends. Interestingly, the first question that came in, it came in before your description of cognitive behavioral therapy. Mm-hmm. But be that as it may, the question was, what do you think about psychedelic microdosing for depression and anxiety?
Mm-hmm. I am not qualified to answer that question. I'm very curious about it. I have a close member of my family who has suffered, now I'll tear up, but who has suffered severely with depression and anxiety over the last 5 years, and especially the last 2 years. And I am really curious about it. I know we have an article on Greater Good magazine about this subject, and I believe it was written by my former colleague, Eve Ekman. You might have heard of Paul Ekman. He's a famous researcher in the science of emotions. Well, Eve is also a researcher in that area. And there is an article, if you went to greatergood.berkeley.edu, she really lays out some of the pluses and minuses around this. And it was a controversial article for us. I won't lie about that. So some people had a strong reaction to it. I literally personally want to speak to my family member's psychiatrist about this too, because I think we're seeing more research on it. And I can't speak with real knowledge about this topic, but I can direct you to that article, and there will probably be links to other articles within the Greater Good Mag article.
And we have our colleague, Michael Pollan, has written the book.
Oh yeah.
Your brain on plants and drugs.
Yes. Well, he's the big name. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's also very similar to an OLLI course that we've had with David Presti, of the same name. We've offered it several times, and perhaps it's time to bring it back.
Yeah, for sure. That would be the person to talk to.
Yeah. So there was a question, you used the term over-connecting with one's emotions. Do you remember?
Oh, yeah.
And could you tell us what you mean by that?
Yeah, I felt like I kind of breezed by that because this isn't a talk as much about mindfulness, but the first element of self-compassion is very mindfulness based for the research. And there's also this word equanimity, which is the idea that I am present to this feeling or to this thought or to this sound or to this breath. But let's keep it at an emotion. I'm present to my emotion, but I'm not over connected in the sense that I am not totally caught up in it, caught up in the wave. Instead, I may be above the wave or deep down in the ocean looking up at the waves as they pass. I am not, I'm not in it, I'm looking at it. I'm with it. It is not who I am. Does that help?
Yeah, well, I think that what I was hearing you say, that partly what happens when you are identifying an emotion is that you are kind of taking yourself a bit out of the experience because you're analyzing something you're experiencing. So I think, it certainly, it comes from different parts of brain function to be able to do that.
And Susan, I guess I just want to respond with another thought on that too. I do a talk around empathic distress, which is something I've always been very personally good at. So in other words, when someone around me is suffering, like my daughter, for example, it's the hardest one for me. My heart is right there with her, and it's very hard for me it has been in the past, to get grounded and to disconnect from the emotion that I feel, the sense of overwhelm that I feel with her. So I've studied empathic distress, and I have an article on greatergood.berkeley.edu that I think it's how to be compassionate without, it's either how to be empathetic or how to be compassionate without suffering so much. And it outlines strategies for psychologically distancing when you're caught up in emotions. That's a different webinar, but there's some really great research on psychologically distancing and self-distancing, and it's in that article. So if folks are interested in it.
What a great resource. Thank you very much. Now there's a question that I probably should go back to, because all I put down on my piece of paper was sex. So you might have seen that. So, and I think I love it. It's an OLLI crowd.
I love it.
Sex is alive and well, except when it's not.
Yeah.
And so, so the question was, is there a strategy about seeing sex as helpful, or when sex is on the decline? Is there something that you could contribute to the understanding about that?
I kept my focus when I was reviewing for this talk on mental health. I'm going to keep throwing you all articles from greatergood.berkeley.edu, because that's what we do. We like do a lit review and we see what are folks saying about a particular topic. And my colleague, Kira Newman, she's the managing editor for our magazine, terrific writer. She has just written, I think about a week ago, an article about how couples are emerging out of the pandemic. And I don't know if it gets specifically, it doesn't talk as much about sex as probably we would all wish that it did, but it does talk about what's happening with couples. And I don't have expertise to offer in this area, but I also, Susan, when you brought this up, it made me think about, was it Adam Grant who talked about how we're all languishing several months back? And I thought that really, really connects with kind of this complacency or lack of desire or disconnection that we may be experiencing. And, if we're experiencing depression and anxiety, neither of those things is helpful for intimacy and connection. And I'm not sure specifically, Susan, what you're asking, if sex is a kind of a one of the things that we should be focusing more on it as a connective intimacy building activity, for sure. Sex therapists would say that. But it's if you're being hard on yourself for feeling a lack of desire or a lack of connection that way, I think this is an area where we all very much cut ourselves some slack, right? Because with mental health, depression, anxiety, and all these things escalating, desire is going to be a little bit more of a struggle. Is that?
Yeah, no, I think you are, you're approaching it from, I think, the various angles that it was being asked and people were seconding the emotion on the chat.
Yeah, I've thought about it a lot myself, and I can't remember where I read this article, but it came out a couple of weeks ago. It was on like setting a date with, if you have a partner, setting sex dates with your partner, and we've heard this all through the years, right? But it was one of the greatest arguments for doing that I've read in a while, and it was very research based. So
yeah,
for what it's worth, I don't know if it was the New York Times or not.
Well, thank you for that. I think that, so here's another question, which I apologize to the person who posed the question. I'm going to paraphrase it somewhat. And her question was, are these ways of understanding and actions, are they helpful to people who've been in a prolonged trauma? Is it something, at any rate, so let me hand that to you.
I feel like I have to do a lot of mental sorting to answer that question. I'm actually writing a book right now on resilience, and I'm on the trauma chapter at this moment. So I'm thinking a lot about trauma and all of the different types of trauma. Are these strategies effective for someone who has experienced prolonged trauma? Is the question, yes?
Correct.
The self-compassion, sort of the biology behind self-compassion, makes so much sense for a person who has experienced trauma, whether single incident trauma or complex trauma, or even insidious race-based trauma. So that our bodies are wired for threat, to respond to threat. And if there are ways that we can tap into the mammalian affiliative caregiving system, whether it's reassuring ourselves or finding social support in relationship, that one to me feels like an automatic fit. We also know that naming emotions there is a huge amount of research, but there is some evidence that it lessens the activation of the amygdala, the emotion center of your brain. So if you are in a situation where you are triggered, that potentially can be helpful. But I think there are a lot of other things that are more helpful than that. I mean, when you have extreme sort of panic symptoms, you feel a sense that you aren't safe in your body. Having some sort of choice, and or having someone reflect, having someone give you space. It's hard for me to translate because I'm automatically thinking as a teacher and how do teachers handle this in the classroom. So I'd have to give it a little more thought to answer fully, but I feel like cognitive reappraisal is much more of I'm going to step back after the fact and really look at this. And when people are triggered by trauma, they have to feel safe first and foremost, right? They have to feel soothed. They have to feel okay in a given moment. And so some of these are a little higher level that we would do after they're in a space where they feel safe and can breathe and can get a cup of water and can do some paced breathing. Paced breathing is excellent for, it can be really helpful for trauma, but also you have to be cautious about breath with trauma and have folks sometimes focus on sounds or sensory experiences rather than breath.
Right. It is, I agree, such a complex question.
Yeah.
Thank you for responding to that. And so we are at 3:01. And so I'm going to ask you just one last question, because there was a back and forth on the chat room, which is there a good time to read the news?
I thought I glanced at that.
When do you read the news, other than out taking a beautiful walk outside? Not recommended, but I think it's the balance that all of us feel, because we absolutely, and certainly this is true of OLLI members, stay very well informed about what's going on. And to do that means that you are listening to just the tragedies and the complexities of daily life and how to balance that. At any rate. So
yeah, you're already
any further thoughts on that, and we'll close.
I so resonate, Susan. I want to be informed. I want to be, I don't want to bury my head in the sand, right? And I know a lot of our audience feels the same. I am absolutely certain of it. We want to be activists. We want to work for the greater good. And how do we find the balance? I think from what I'm reading and seeing, it's choosing your sources well, obviously. I'm getting pretty narrow in my selection at this point because everything feels too dramatic. So, I'm a big NPR fan, and I won't start promoting different resources, but I think it's small dosage, doses. So dosage is important. So I'm going to take this time today to read, and I'm going to park it from there, right? Because I think we carry what we're reading, and then I'm sure many of your people in your audience are also thinking about ways that they can volunteer and help, which is also really empowering when you're chipping away at a particular cause that's really important to you, like climate change or the environment, or supporting folks in your community. And that can be a nice antidote. It's every little thing we do has a ripple effect.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it is also echoed in the chat room when someone mentions Heather Cox Richardson, who takes the news of the day and gives a historical context. And so, for some reason, which we can acknowledge, it does help to know we've been here before, how things are different, how much they're the same. Amy, thank you very much for today. I feel like we are a little bit lighter as a result of the discussion.
Oh, thank you. What a great group of people. I know you all are. I wish I could see your faces, and I've just had such a good time getting to know you and Nancy, Susan, and I just wish you all, I wish you well, and we're going to be okay. We're going to make it through, and we just really need to support each other more than anything, and not lose sight of our social networks.
Thank you. Agreed. All right. Goodbye, OLLI members for today. We'll see you in the other conversations that are happening this week. Take care.